Hello and welcome to a brand new Smash for Switch discussion. I'm your host NantenJex, and joining me today is special guest and YouTuber Delzethin. Alright, and today we're going to be tackling the Pokémon franchise, specifically what their chances are of that series getting a new character in Smash for Switch. So that's why I've brought Del here, because his knowledge of Pokemon is quite extensive. And I know he has his own specific thoughts about the chances of Pokemon and which Pokemon we're likely to see. So before we get into any specific details, Del, what do you think are the chances that we'll get a new Pokemon in this game?
Overall, pretty high. I know it's not. I know Pokemon isn't always a super popular series in the context of Smash for a handful of different reasons that I won't go into right now. But considering the circumstances, considering the series just keeps growing, considering it's Nintendo's second biggest franchise and has this massive number of potential playable characters with all these different and unique abilities and powers that rarely show up in other Nintendo series, and since that uniqueness is something that Sakurai said he and his team look for, I think, considering the circumstances, considering we just had Sun and Moon come out and that makes an entire new generation relevant, that there's a very good chance we could get a potential newcomer from Gen 7 in this potential Switch port.
Yeah,
And
I completely agree with you. I think that Pokemon is one of them series that is always growing. I think every single Smash game has introduced a new Pokemon character, and
in fact,
even if we only get two characters like the rumors suggest, I think one of them has a high chance of being a Pokemon. You're right. Especially last year with how big the series got via Pokemon Go and Sun and Moon and the anime X and Y anime finishing and the new one starting. It was really really popular, and I think there's a lot of places that they can pull from for a new character for this game.
and not just that, I know this isn't exactly the most popular opinion for other reasons, but not just one character. I think if we end up getting more than some of these rumors suggested, if we end up getting a number of characters roughly around what we got for the initial run of DLC, I think there's a chance we could see two new Pokemon characters just because there are so many compelling options in this series.
Hmm. See, I don't quite agree with you on that unless one of them is a veteran. But I do understand that, yeah, you're right. There are a lot of compelling Pokemon ideas, which is why we've got a few of them down for this discussion now. So we'll jump straight into it, and I think the first one we're going to talk about is one that both me and you unanimously think is the most likely Pokemon, and that is Decidueye.
Decidueye.
Yeah. So he's the grass starter from the Sun and Moon from Gen 7, and he's essentially this generation's Greninja. He was super popular when he was first introduced as Rowlet. His design and style fits a fighting game. He's the Pokemon that Ash has got in the anime, which is the same thing as Greninja. I think he fits a lot of the same criteria that allowed Sakurai to pick Greninja for Smash. And on top of that, he's also unique compared to most other fighters. He's this bipedal owl who's an archer. Is also part ghost type, and we've only got one other bird in the Smash roster currently, being Falco, and he's very different from Falco in that, especially considering Falco's just really a clone of Fox, whereas Decidueye would be entirely unique. Yeah.
And yeah, you touched on quite a bit of it. Rowlet ended up being the most popular of the starters from the get go. Not quite to the point where Greninja ended up above and beyond anything else in Gen 6, and I think Gen 7's fan favorites are a little closer. But I do think Decidueye is more of a standout than many of the others, and especially since a lot of the Pokemon characters in Smash have take some kind of inspiration from the anime, at least, more even though they're more intrinsically based on the games. And as we know, Ash has already picked up a Rowlet in the Sun and Moon anime, and he's going to end up with a Decidueye almost surely. And that's a point in Decidueye's favor on top of all of these other points. Being having all these powers, being a grass type and having control over plants, being a ghost type, and therefore being able to kind of add in stuff associated with the shadowy, the occult, etc. You know, starting out as a flying type before dropping it for ghost, and therefore having some ability to control wind. have, then there's the archery, of course, and although we've had some archery attacks in Smash before, they basically have been restricted to the neutral special of four different characters, one of whom is a full clone, one of whom is a semi-clone, and so a more specialized archer character would be very much unique, and I think, that's the core of why Decidueye is such a compelling option. It's that uniqueness. It's the fact that it can do so many different and interesting things to stand out on a roster of nearly 60 now, and what will probably be at least 60 when this port drops.
Hmm.
And that's also another way where I think Pokemon, more than nearly any other series, is a case where much of the fan base looks at the wrong things. Like, I've seen some arguments that like back when DLC was going on and there was some support for Sceptile, and I was actually a Sceptile supporter back then, and there were people saying that oh, since we have a water starter, since we have a fire starter, we need a grass starter to complete the triangle. It's like we need to fulfill this quota, but that's not how Sakurai and his team looks at things. Not based on what he said. What he's looking more for is he's looking more for these relevant newcomers, these relevant first party newcomers. Third party is a different story entirely, follows some slightly different rules apparently. He's looking for first party newcomers who are relevant and who bring unique and interesting things to the roster that help them stand out. Something they can build a very compelling character concept around. And as you know, that's kind of my whole deal. That's what my latest YouTube series is all about, finding compelling character concepts for characters who could potentially get into Smash and figure out why they would work and what they could do.
Yeah,
And
right.
so
And yeah, I think Decidueye doesn't need. I think he's compelling enough without just having to be a grass starter that balances out the trio. Because we know, like, I wanted to bring up that in the past, Sakurai has looked at sort of stuff like that with the Pokemon trainer. His whole thing surrounding that was to represent the starters rather than the grass, fire, water specifically. It was to represent each starter, and adding Decidueye would do the same thing. It would be grass with him, fire with Charizard, water with Greninja, all of which are starters. But I don't think they'd add him specifically for that purpose. I think that would just be a bonus to of having Decidueye. I think he's unique enough that he doesn't need to just because he's a grass starter. They could focus more specifically on the ghost and flying part of him and the archery part of him than the grass part, and it would. I think he could still be compelling.
very
So
much so.
yeah. So I think that we kind of just pretty much covered everything over Decidueye, but it's like he is that key of a character. But there is one other Gen 7 character that I think both me and Del think could have a shot if Decidueye doesn't make it, at least, and that's Lycanroc, the rock wolf Pokemon.
And not just if the Decidueye doesn't make it or if they decide to pass on the Decidueye. I personally think that, again, if we have enough new content, if we have enough new characters, the Decidueye and Lycanroc could both get in because both have such wildly different abilities that they might decide, hey, maybe it would actually be worth adding another Pokemon character in, even though there might be some backlash because this character is just so compelling. And we've seen similar situations happen before. I mean, we got two Pokemon newcomers in Melee, well, one and a half, sort of. We got four new Pokemon in Brawl. And, like, even in Smash 4, we saw two Mario newcomers, and we saw DLC alone bring in two characters from Fire Emblem, despite concerns that Corrin might be one too many because they decided the concept was still worth adding nonetheless. And that's something I think could easily happen here with Lycanroc.
No, yeah, no, that's very true actually. So, before we jump into proper details of the Lycanroc and stuff, I want to explain why him over other Gen 7 Pokemon. And I think that's just because of the build up surrounding him. Like, he was it was originally introduced obviously in his first form as Rockruff, and he was being built up to have like this unique feature about him that he's like got a connection with starter Pokemon, that like he's important to the story in some sort of sense. I know the Professor uses him, and one of the Kahunas uses him, and he was being built up quite a bit to be this popular Pokemon. And
it's that, like as far as archetypes go, like you said, how Decidueye has kind of become the Greninja of Gen 7. I'd argue that Lycanroc has become Gen 7's Lucario in a way, in every way, just short of having its own movie. And it's not as much of a massive standout the way the original Lucario was, because, like I said, Gen 7 has a lot of fan favorites, a lot of standouts compared to Gen 4 only having a few. And,
Yeah.
and they did build the Rockruff lineup to be a pretty big deal. And, and it's like I previously mentioned, many Pokemon characters in Smash have some kind of anime inspiration, some kind of anime counterpart. And, well, the region's Professor Kukui, uses the Rockruff line as kind of his signature thing. Like, he's got a little Rockruff assistant. He has a midday Lycanroc he pulls out in battle late in the game.
Hmm.
And then there's also the Kahuna Olivia, who has a midnight Lycanroc, which she uses both in her Kahuna fight and as her signature mon as a member of the Alolan League as an Elite Four member.
Right.
And then there's all the different like NPC Rockruffs that show up everywhere in Alola, and it's just this constant presence to the point where this line feels like it was designed to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And remember, like, since they would have been looking at Gen 7 mods sometime back, like earlier this year, around the spring or so, potentially, before Sun and Moon came out. So they'd be doing something similar to what they did with Greninja, where they probably looked down a list of, they probably got assets from Nintendo, Game Freak, the Pokemon Company International, etc. Some art assets and details of a handful of different mods from Gen 7, and they probably decided, okay, what kind of concepts can we build from these?
Hmm.
So even though
Hmm.
Lycanroc may not have taken off to the point where Lucario did, I
Hmm.
think this importance, this prominence that the line seems to have would have been enough to where Lycanroc would have been one of the characters they considered. And from there, I think the line's abilities might be enough to kind of give it that chance.
Yeah, I think comparing it to Lucario is actually a pretty good comparison. He's a bit similar to Zoroark in that sort of sense, who was essentially Gen 5's Lucario. And we all know how popular he was for Smash speculation back in the day. And
Right.
so, yeah, I can easily see Lycanroc actually being that sort of, filling that sort of quota. But what makes Lycanroc special is that he has two separate second forms, being his midday form and his midnight form. His midnight form being some bipedal, edgy-looking werewolf, and his midday form being like an actual proper wolf on all fours and stuff. And for me, I think I would rather the midday form, the one that's on all fours, because I think that's different from any other character we've got in Smash. I think that the him being on all fours, we only really see that in like Duck Hunt Dog, who is a bit
Right.
more Looney Tunes and a bit more cartoony than most other than real wolves, for example.
And yeah, it's like you said, they're like, and I did a character concept over Lycanroc recently, and it was by far the most complicated one I've done so far because I looked at the character from all these different angles. Like, I tried to, like, I considered, what if they go with just one of the two forms, and then I looked at either one, and then I also looked at uh, how they could potentially use both forms together. And it's like you said, on one hand, Midnight is the more practical form for Smash, just because bipedal builds are kind of better built for a platform fighter environment. But at the same time, Midday could also be a more compelling option because being a quadruped, while still not being impossible in the context of Smash, would make that much more compelling of an option.
Hmm.
Or, as I mentioned in the video, what they could do is find a way to combine both forms and have one Lycanroc who could shift between them at will. And then the interesting thing is, for one, while they've moved away from character transformations, while they've moved away from these moveset transformations, they seem to have made a conscious decision to do so, and not just because of the limitations of the 3DS and its RAM and stuff, but also because they seem to have decided they don't want to go in that direction anymore. And yet, since both Lycanroc forms have nearly identical level sets in the Pokemon games, they could actually set it up so that it's closer to a stance system, where both forms have nearly identical movesets, and it's just the properties of those movesets, the way those movesets come out due to differences in build, the slightly different animations, different hitboxes, different types of knockback and effects and stuff, make it function a little closer to the different stances into a full-on moveset transformation, and that's actually a very interesting angle to go with because Now you have this character who would be the first character still capable of quote transformation despite these new criteria. And as we know, people seem to really like their transforming characters, so this could be a very interesting option. And secondly, while I bet a lot of people listening to this are going, wait a minute, but Lycanroc can't switch shift between forms in the games. You're stuck with whichever one you evolve your Rockruff evolves into. And the thing is, we've seen Sakurai take different creative liberties with characters before. Like for example, like many of the PK attacks Ness uses aren't actually learned by Ness in Earthbound. They're learned by a couple of his other party members, and something similar happens with Lucas. Or there's the fact that most of Zelda's specials involve goddess magic that we've never actually seen her use. Or the fact that Robin has a Nosferatu tome even though he can't normally wield dark tomes in the tactician class. Or the fact that, specifically, Lucario in Smash has this aura damage scaling mechanic that just straight up doesn't exist anywhere other than Smash. And so I wonder if this could potentially be another case of where they could take a creative liberty that might not be 100% true to canon, but lets them make a more compelling concept that better exemplifies the character as a whole. Because, like the thing with Lycanroc is the fact that you have these two forms based on which of the two legendaries they're influenced by more. And so that potentially a transforming one might be able to best showcase that entire concept. In addition to, it's like you said, how the Pokemon trainers design was originally kind of done to showcase the concept of the starters and the contents of Pokemon. We've had form changes ever since as far back as Gen 3, and we could potentially here have a character who can really showcase the concept of form changing as part of its identity in this greater, super interesting concept as a whole, on top of being a rock type and essentially an earthbender on a roster that has next to no earth attacks already.
Mm-hmm. All right. So those are the two big Gen 7 Pokemon that we're talking about. But I know we've got some ideas. Well, for other Gen 7s that I mean, they're different. We don't fully agree on any particular one from both of us. But I thought they would be worth mentioning. I thought it'd be worth mentioning some of the bigger ones anyway. So if you want to start, Dal.
So, and the thing with Gen 7 is there are a lot of kind of, I don't want to say lower end because that's not the best way to describe them, like non front runners who could be compelling options for their own reasons. Like, for example, one I've seen mentioned a few times in different places is Scelali, the evolved form of type Null, the signature mon of the major character Gladion.
Mm.
And so Valai's whole thing is that it's essentially a chimera created to be the ultimate means to deal with these extra dimensional creatures called Ultra Beasts, and how it basically imitates Arceus in that you can equip it with different things that allow it to change its typing and also change the typing of its signature move. So one interesting thing I could see them doing is using that system, the RKS system, it's called in games ability, kind of clever,
Yeah.
and use that to create some kind of stance system of its own. Although I'm not entirely sure what the best way is to go about that yet. I'm still just kind of messing around with the concept for Scelali so far. I haven't figured out a fully concrete one so far. I think there could be some potential there. It's just I don't know how practical it'd be.
Yeah, well, it'd be obviously, like you said, evolve changing types and stuff, but you'd have to be, because I think it'd be a bit ridiculous to go over all 16 types that Pokemon has, unless, I mean, it's just a lot for players to manage.
18 types.
Yeah, it would change, 18 types even, so even more.
So you'd have to limit it to some extent and have some way of making each one feel different in some regard. And it's this whole process. I know you don't want to go too far into character concepts right today because I'd just start gushing over them, and this isn't the time. But there's another under the radar one I want to talk about because I think it could actually sort of make a little bit of sense as another, like as a potential second pick after Decidueye or after Lycanroc, because this could really this could really tie into some themes they've been running with for most of the last year, and that is Ninetales, specifically Alolan Ninetales.
Hmm.
And because they've been going on, since Sun and Moon released on the 20th anniversary of the series. They've been doing all this work to kind of tie the old to the new. Like they've been putting so much of an emphasis on where the series has been, where and how it's gotten to where it is. Pokemon Go was this massive deal, and it released starting with the Gen 1 Pokemon. They're starting to cycle in stuff from Gen 2 as we speak. But it started with that very beginning. You had Pokemon generations going from covering key events from the very beginning of the games all the way up to the present. And there's this, you can kind of see an argument for wanting to add a character who could kind of exemplify that combination of old and new. And so, and then with Sun and Moon, they added in these regional variants, these alternate forms for some Gen 1 mods based on the real world idea of divergence evolution. And there have been a few standouts for those, and Ninetales just so happens to be one of those standouts. In addition to having a typing Ice and Fairy that we've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And also in the context of Smash, that's also very interesting because the current roster has nothing that uses Ice, and even with the Ice Climbers, they only use Ice as an element in just 2 attacks, their neutral and down specials. So the concept of a character who would be kind of this master of Ice who could manipulate cold in all these different ways could actually be pretty interesting. And, being a quadruped, while it can be kind of impractical at times, might actually there's actually some ways that a playable Ninetales could get around it, since you got you got those massive tails are in the name, and like if they say found a way to if they decide to like make them prehensile or something, make it so they could pick items up or be used in grabs and stuff, then that could actually be very interesting in and of itself. And like I've seen like no one actually consider this character, and I realize it's a long shot, and I'm probably biased to because it's one of my favorite designs they've ever made. But I think there's like if you squint a little, you could kind of see a chance of something like this maybe happening. And I think as far as speculation goes, we need to consider some of the unexpected stuff that might not be the most obvious, but could actually make a bit of sense in kind of an unconventional way if they were to decide to look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can imagine how Alolan Ninetales might work, because you're right. Having a character who's specifically all about ice is something that we haven't had. And again, Alolan Ninetales is a quadruped, which is something that I think the roster is lacking in, which is one of the reasons I like Lycanroc. So my Pokemon from Gen 7, my other one, is a Pokemon that I haven't seen brought up much, but is like, at least in the context of Smash, but I know it is really popular, especially in Japan, and that's Mimikyu, the ghost mimic Pokemon who likes to dress up as Pikachu and wants to be loved. And I think there are some interesting ideas behind Mimikyu as a ghost type. But I also think the big key reason I kind of see him is that we originally had in Melee Pichu introduced, who was a kind of joke character who was a clone of Pikachu and like a weaker version who damaged himself. But Mimikyu could almost fit that same role as a joke character without actually being a clone. A character who wants to be Pikachu, a character who's trying to imitate the Pikachu who's already in Smash, using his ghost abilities, but ending up doing them in completely different ways. So rather than like a Thunder Jolt has I don't know any ghost moves off the top of my head, to be honest, but has like
There's actually
ghost
not many that would
spirit-based
actually
attacks.
work. There's not actually any ghost attacks off the top of my head that would work very well as a Thunder Jolt counterpart. And in fact, like one of the go-to ghost moves, Shadow Ball, is kind of already being used by Mewtwo. And like I don't know, like the thing with Mimikyu is, personally, I'm not really sold on the idea of Mimikyu in Smash. Like I know the character is really popular. I know it's a fan favorite. It's very, like the idea of this kind of underdog character, this cursed poor soul who just wants to be loved. Like it's a very likable character.
Hmm.
But in the context of Smash, that popularity only goes so far. It's like Mimikyu's build in general, like having no no default limbs except for that kind of shadowy arm you can whip out from under its disguise. In its form in general, it's very difficult to work with. And I tried to rack my brain for a concept that would work, and I haven't
Hmm.
found anything so far. And
Oh,
one thing that I think some speculators don't really understand is that these character concepts, these move sets, they don't just get conjured up out of nowhere after a character is already chosen. They're an integral part of the selection process. It's like how Sakurai talked about how one of the reasons they went forward with Robin and decided to pass up on Crom is because they couldn't find anything that really worked for Crom that didn't leave him feeling like a retread of Martha Ike. And so, we know that character concepts are very much an important part of deciding who the most interesting options are as far as potential playable characters could be. And while I'm not ruling out that they might find something that works, I'm just not really seeing it for Mimikyu. Like, I think it would work better right now as a summon more than anything else.
well, yeah, I could see it being a new Pokeball Pokemon as well. But I think if anyone can make any kind of concept work for Mimikyu, I think Sakurai could do it. I mean, he could do it for the villager for Animal Crossing. I think he might be able to do it for, and Duck Hunt as well. I think he might be able to do it for Mimikyu. But that kind of covers it for the Gen 7 Pokemon. But so the next, I mentioned this previously. If we do get two Pokemon, I could see it if they were veterans, if one of them was a veteran. And I know you disagree with me on that, and that you gave your thoughts on that. Yeah, that's fine. But let's talk about the veterans, because there are three Pokemon veterans, if not including the Pokemon trainer, who would be interesting, because I think him as a concept was a good one. But with the removal of transformations and no sign of them coming back, I don't think the Pokemon trainer could make a comeback. And would he be even considered a veteran if he doesn't have Charizard back in it? If he was just Squirtle and Ivysaur, would that defeat the whole purpose because it's not representing the starter trio and stuff like that? So I just wanted to touch on Pokemon trainer because if they do bring him back, he'll probably be a new character. But going to the veterans, you have three. Pichu, who was a clone of Pikachu, and as I mentioned with the Mimikyu part, like a joke character, hurt himself and stuff like that. Squirtle, who was the water starter, who was very light, very fast to counteract Charizard's heavy nature. And Ivysaur, who was quadruped grass type Pokemon, who I don't know, he was just kind of there. I mean, I just feel like we got Ivysaur instead of Bulbasaur and Venusaur because Squirtle and Charizard were already chosen, and so Ivysaur just kind of got in by chance. But he was a very unique character from them three for the roster. He was very different from other characters in Smash. Didn't make him good. He had a really bad recovery, but he was different at least. And I just wanted to touch up on these three because out of them, I'm personally in the ballpark that Pichu is the most likely, and I know that's not a very popular opinion. But when you look at the melee characters we have left, who are both Young Link and Pichu, if any one of them was going to get not including Ice Climbers, of course. Ice Climbers, I kind of consider them a separate thing. I'm thinking of this more like how Roy was chosen for DLC to come back and made sort of like a semi-clone. And I feel like the same thing could happen to Pichu, and he has a bigger chance than Young Link for the simple fact that there's already two Links in the roster, whereas there isn't a
Well,
second Pikachu yet.
like I think the situation's a little more complicated than that because, well, for one, I don't think they'd bring back a melee veteran just to say they brought back another melee veteran. I think they'd weigh stuff in context. For two, while they did bring back Roy, we also know that Roy was planned for Brawl, and I'm actually willing to bet that his semi-clone concept actually dates back to Brawl's development. And I think that might have been actually one of the main reasons why they actually thought to bring him back is because they already had that concept figured out and knew that he'd still at least not feel like a complete retread of Marth and or Lucina. And
I'm not 100% convinced on that point, but I do understand where you're coming from. But I don't feel like that instantly means Pichu can't be just made into a semi-clone of
But it's
Pikachu.
more the fact that you know, like if you want to argue that they could bring the character up and then declone them, when it seems like that wasn't what happened with Roy. I'm not entirely convinced, especially with a character like Pichu who was so divisive among the Smash community. Like I know we got a bit of popularity in places, but you have a character who is outright disliked by so many people. And maybe I'm a little biased for this because personally I'm not a big fan of deliberately bad joke characters, but I just don't see there being a very compelling case over so many of these other characters, over so many of these potentially fascinating newcomers.
I think it would just be an easy choice, and I think bringing back veterans is important because they do have fans already in the game that you want to make happy. And I'm not saying Pichu's a more likely veteran than, say, Ice Climbers or Wolf or even Snake. But out of the three Pokemon, Pichu's certainly the easiest to bring back. And if you're right, they don't have to do one from Melee, and in that situation, I think Squirtle and Ivysaur could have a chance. My only issue with them is which one do you bring? Do you just pick one of them, or do you bring both of them? Charizard made sense if you were just to bring one, because he was by far the most popular Pokemon out of them. But, like, do you just bring Squirtle and abandon Ivysaur? That doesn't seem like fans of Ivysaur are just being left out then, and I don't think the popularity gap is as big between those two as it was with Charizard and everyone and all the others.
Right, and it's almost as if Squirtle and Ivysaur were mainly there more due to the Pokemon trainer as a concept, like because they wanted to kind of show the idea of a trainer who can switch between multiple party members as needed, as if they were fighting an actual Pokemon battle.
Hmm.
And once they moved away from character transformations, Charizard stuck around because Charizard's already super popular and has some interesting stuff. But then Squirtle and Ivysaur became lower priority.
Yeah.
And the question is, would that would that lessened priority be enough to give them a reason to be chosen now, or would they look at other stuff first? And I'm just not that confident. There's definitely the case of the Ice Climbers who were planned to be in Smash 4, and then they couldn't get them to work without causing the 3DS version to lag. Or I could also see a case for Wolf, whose series was out of that whose series had fallen out of relevance during Smash 4's development, but now has kind of become relevant again. But Squirtle and Ivysaur, I almost feel like their series has kind of moved on due to Pokemon having kind of a rotating cast of sorts, and like especially with Gen 7 and all of these super interesting newcomer options, it's just that it's kind of a hard sell and feels a little too reliant on nostalgia almost. Like maybe this is coming from someone who personally prefers newcomers over most veterans, but I just kind of have a difficult time envisioning Ivysaur being a more compelling option than Decidueye, for example.
Well, I think I should stress that I don't think that a veteran will come in the place of a newcomer. I think if we got a Pokemon veteran, it would be as a secondary Pokemon character. I think that a newcomer does make more sense. And this is only if we get more than two characters. If we're only sticking with the two character thing, then I don't think any of these veteran Pokemon are likely. But I think that the one advantage that Squirtle and Ivysaur have is that it's easier to bring characters over from Brawl because they can just port the data over, which is a good argument for Wolf and Snake and Ice Climbers as well, as they were all also in Brawl. But depending on how easy it is, if they have the time, they could easily just bring both Squirtle and Ivysaur over with very minimal changes, just having to balance them with the new characters.
So you're arguing that they'd be almost like a bonus clone kind of situation where they could say, hey, we got a little bit of extra time, maybe we can bring Squirtle or Ivysaur over from Brawl?
Yeah, it comes down to the argument of whether or not do we do Pichu and just make him based off of Pikachu but have to redo him, or do we just port Squirtle and Ivysaur over and then just balance them basically. Like it comes down to whichever one is gonna be the quickest. But I could see that, especially if like say, for example, they were planning this Smash originally for launch, but then it was decided to delay it by however many months, then that's more time that they weren't expecting, and could potentially have more time to actually work on some last-minute characters or something.
Maybe.
Yeah, and that's where all the veterans come in. But no, I don't think a veteran's more likely than a newcomer. But as a secondary Pokemon, as a side dish, I think a veteran Pokemon is probably more likely than a second newcomer, at least in my opinion.
Like, Pokemon is this massive series and arguably has more to talk about in the context of Smash than any other right now, just because Gen 7 brought all these new characters to the table.
Right.
And first of all, I think we want to talk about the Smash ballot real quickly and the odds that we might see might see them pull more from the Smash ballot for this port.
This is
Although,
where Sceptile and Zoroark's sort of chances might pop in.
right, because ironically enough, as big as a Pokemon series is, there weren't very many that got looked at for the Smash ballot. Mainly because like a big part of the Smash ballot was people bringing in these characters that they cared about for so long that they grew up with, or characters that they were just recently made aware of. And Pokemon tends to kind of fall in a gray area there for the most part.
Well, I think a big thing with Pokemon is that when you compare it to most other series, especially the big ones that we get here, like people yell at everyone about, the ones that with all the bandwagon in effect, I think people are mostly okay with the Pokemon roster that we have. Because, I mean, I think everyone understands that with 700 odd Pokemon, you can't expect specifically your random favorite to be chosen. And, like, I'm not going to sit here and expect Seadra to be a potential candidate for the Smash Brothers roster. Whereas when you compare it to all the loud ones like King K. Rool or Dixie Kong or Ridley or Isaac or Crystal, for example, they're all from series that people either think deserve new representation or should just be added to Smash in general. Like, people want the Golden Sun series, people think there should be another Donkey Kong or Metroid character, people want a unique Star Fox character. There are all gaps in the roster that people think should be filled, whereas with Pokemon, that gap's not there to the same extent.
Right, and worse, making matters worse for Sceptile in particular, who was the only real major standout as far as ballot picks went for Pokemon, is that there's a new grass starter in town, and it's very, very compelling and already a fan favorite.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it'd be a very difficult sell to bring in Sceptile when you already have Decidueye. Like with Decidueye, probably like a very likely the most likely Pokemon to get in. And I'm not saying we couldn't get two grass types in, because if they were unique enough it could happen, but it'd be difficult to argue for Decidueye and Sceptile over, say, Decidueye and Lycanroc.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a big enough difference between Decidueye and Lycanroc to warrant both of them, whereas that difference isn't present with Decidueye and Sceptile. Like, they do share similar moves. They have both used Leaf Blade. They both use Razor Leaf. In fact, a lot of their grass moves are actually quite the same. It's Decidueye's big difference is that he's got the flying and ghost type moves as well.
And so if they were to pull another character from the Smash ballot with Decidueye already in, they'd probably look at other franchises.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's more likely. I don't think Pokemon will get someone from the ballot being added in unless there's some kind of massive surprise that no one was expecting from like the super casual audience, but I don't think that's
Or if they
probable.
or if they pull or if they got so enamored by something just a few people voted for that they just couldn't pass them up or something. Hey, I got to consider all options here.
Yes, of course. So, one of the final things after the ballot was that with Smash 4, we know that there were characters that were considered who didn't make it in the end. Where Sakurai's mentioned Takamaru before. There's evidence in the game's files that a Rhythm Heaven character might have been considered. We already brought up Chrom, but we don't know the full extent of this. And it is possible that some other Pokemon were considered for Smash 4. We saw with Brawl there was like Plusle and Minun who were considered, but potentially if we're assuming that based on the data that's found in the game. But we do know that Blastoise was considered before Charizard got chosen and Squirtle took his place. So Pokemon have definitely been considered and swapped out and stuff like that before, and the same thing could have happened with this new one. And so we would just go, depending on how development for this goes, rather than make brand new characters, they might just be relying on using the stuff that they didn't finish in time for the Wii U game and just working on that instead. In which case, we might see a previous generation Pokemon who was considered being added in this time rather than a completely brand new one.
Right, and it's another option that I think is worth considering. Like, people speculating maybe Sakurai won't be directly involved with this one. Maybe he'll just be a consultant. Maybe they won't want to create something fully new, and they'd rather just kind of go back to the drawing board and pick up concepts that were too low priority to get in before. And that's where I think a potentially very interesting situation could happen. Because as we know, they chose Greninja to be playable in Smash 4 before Pokemon X and Y came out, before Gen 6 officially started. And they did that because, they did that by obtaining details and art assets and concept notes and all of these other things from the team working on X and Y, and then use them to gauge, okay, how can we build this concept? Is this a potentially compelling character? But here's the thing that no one's talking about. There's no way Greninja was the only Gen 6 Pokemon they looked at. They wouldn't have put all their eggs in one basket like that. It just doesn't make sense from a development standpoint. There would have been other Gen 6 mods they looked at. And that's where I think things get interesting, because if they did end up kind of going back and bringing in stuff that was considered for Smash 4's base version but didn't get in, maybe we could see another mod from Gen 6.
Yeah. I think the most likely ones to look at for this are the ones that made a bigger presence, I guess, the ones that were built up a lot more, and there were 3 on the top of my head that are worth mentioning. I think the other 2 starters, who was Chestnut, I believe, and Delphox, and then the third one being Sylveon, because fairy types were a brand new thing, and this new Eevee evolution was being hyped up quite a bit in the build-up, because it's the first fairy type Pokemon revealed. So, tackling the starter Pokemon first, I guess. I know you've got stuff to say on Delphox, so don't worry, I'll let you do that.
So actually, yeah, there's.
I wanted to bring up Chestnut first because he's first in the Pokédex, but also the reason why I don't think he's as likely, and that's only because he's very similar in build and stuff to Bowser. I think it's a very similar situation that we were talking about with Incineroar. Chestnut is like some big, heavy tank type character, and that's not particularly unique. Arguably, Greninja wasn't super unique with a ninja as a ninja character simply because Sheik was already there.
Well, Greninja does play very differently than Sheik.
Yes, he does, and Chestnut as a grass type might play differently from Bowser, who's a fire type. But from a simple idea perspective, both of them are heavy tank-like characters with massive shells. I think that's what Chestnut has on their
yeah,
back.
It's sort of, it's armor, more or less.
Yeah. And I think those kind of clash, which makes Chestnut like a less favourable option.
Like, I don't know if it's quite as extreme as Incineroar could be, but I see the point. That plus the fact that Chestnut isn't really as big of a deal as the other 2 college starters, could kind of work against it to an extent. I mean, I could sort of see the point because, like, if they were only going back to Gen 6, then Decidueye would be off the table, unfortunately, and so we still wouldn't have a grass type, and maybe there's the potential there for kind of a tankier character with plant powers who has the ability to, like, kind of armor right through some attacks or something.
A lot of super armor and stuff. As long as it's based around being, a tank, I think it could work, yeah. So Delphox is the other one, being a fire witch mage, and I'm just going to let you take over on this one.
Oh, this is going to be fun. Okay, so fun fact, there was actually kind of a minor Delphox support group on Smashboards, and I was the one who spearheaded it, because I think there's actually this very interesting character here that a lot of people just kind of wrote off, because it wasn't exactly what they expected. You see, because I think a bad habit of a lot of Pokemon fans is that when they get these pictures of how they think the starters are going to turn out, and they basically expect more of the same almost. They expect some safe designs that just feel like the base form but bigger. And then we turn out with something a little more dynamic, like what's been happening with most of the starters since like Gen 4, then there can be some backlash if the design doesn't absolutely blow them away the way Greninja did. And that's what I think kind of happened to screw Delphox over a little at first, because people expected breaks in 2.0. They wanted they wanted kind of this cute witch-like figure, and while that's okay, when we ended up getting this more mature, classy mage wizard-like figure instead, they didn't like having their expectations defined, and so there was some backlash. And combined with the fact that our first glimpse of Delphox was through a leak a few days ahead of time that showed a 3D model. It's infamously bad 3D model that turned more people off the idea. And like there's been a bit of a bounce back since. There's been a bit more of this general idea that it's an interesting character with a crap 3D model that ruins its actually pretty interesting art and stuff. And more than anything, I think there's potential there, and I think there's reason to think that Delphox would have been considered among the other Gen 6 mods because, specifically because we're talking about a mage here. And mages are super rare on the Smash roster. Like, the only two you could really argue are mages on the roster are Robin and Zelda. Like, the potential for a different mage character to do different things in those two is very compelling. Because, magic is a super broad concept, and yet we haven't done much with it so far in Smash. And while it would be another fire user, it'd specifically be a fire user who specializes in magic and in indirect attacks, which would still stand out to an extent compared to all the other physical fire users. Especially if, and this is more of a personal idea, if they took her fire abilities and ran with the fact that the line's signature move, Mystical Fire, has kind of a green-colored tint to it because it uses this special magically altered extra hot fire. And fire can change temperature depending on the chemicals you throw into it or the temperature it's at. What if they made her fire attacks multicolored?
That'd be pretty
And I
nice.
think that would be visually stunning. It would be interesting. It would tie into this idea of this character manipulating her fire through magic, and it could be a very compelling idea overall. Not very likely now, mind you, Shane, but if they did go back to previous ideas for Smash 4, maybe. Who knows?
All right.
I think it's worth considering.
All right. And so the third one was Sylveon, who is the first fairy type. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. The only reason I brought it up is because of that fact makes her stand out a bit more than other Gen 6 Pokemon.
Right. I could see that to an extent, maybe. I mean, because again, like Sylveon is the fairy type, was the first fairy type revealed, other than the ones that were retconned into being part fairy. But there's a few interesting things to go off there. There's the fact that it's got those prehensile ribbon things that it can use for some attacks and can pick up items and grab people. You could have a character who uses more of the full breadth of what the fairy type can do, considering Jigglypuff does next to nothing with it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's also a chance you could potentially run into a few moveset issues because evolutions kind of have, they're famous for having kind of narrow move pools.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where you'd have to look at like TMs and move shooters and just stick to not just specifically moves based around fairy attacks rather than moves that she learns. But I understand the issue that you're bringing up for that one. All right. Well, are there any other Gen 6 Pokemon who you feel should be worth mentioning, or any other Pokemon they might have considered for this at this period?
I do think this is a personal theory. I think they might have briefly considered Zoroark at some point early in development, but then they decided that they were better off looking at Gen 6 because because X and Y were going to be out before Smash 4's release, so Gen 6 was going to be the relevant one. I could maybe see an outside chance of them looking at Zoroark, but not for the reasons a lot of people think. Like, I've seen people acting like, oh, they just have it transform into other characters, but that's not how Zoroark's powers work. He just, it's not a shapeshifter. Like, they create illusions. So I think there's actually a compelling niche in, for one, having a character based around darkness as an element, which isn't very common. Like, our only dark-based characters are Pitu and Ganondorf, and they're more physical based. In Ganon's case, or in Dark Pit's case, uses non-dark attacks more than anything.
Hmm.
And a character based on both darkness as an element and on trickery. Like I kind of had this pet idea of where a playable Zoroark could have extra inputs that would make its attacks basically not exist. You could throw in an extra input to make a hitbox throws out be a fake one, and then cancel out of it early and punish. Constantly keep opponents guessing, which of the attacks are real and which are just illusions.
That could be a clever idea, actually, and it would fit into his theme, his overall theme and abilities. Yeah. Okay. So, I think that really covers it for everything that we wanted to talk about in for Smash for Switch.
All of those things to cover.
Yes, there's a lot of Pokemon out there, so of course this was going to take a while. I think we'll find out sooner. I don't know if a Pokemon will be the first one they show off at. It depends really how many characters there are and how they plan on going about this. If there's only 2 characters, I could easily see one being shown off now in the January event, and then another not being shown off till E3. And so I think Inklings are a bit more likely to be shown off first. So we might not get our next Pokemon character until E3 if it happens. But we'll see. It really depends on how many characters they do have planned for this game and when it even plans on releasing. So until then,
Or
we're just
even,
going to have to keep guessing and thinking and wondering which Pokemon to get. But while you're doing
part of the
that,
fun.
you can check out the rest of Source Gaming's videos on our channel. Make sure you subscribe and stay up to date. We're going to be covering all the Smash news, especially when this game gets fully revealed. You know we're going to have a lot of coverage over it, going over every little bit, details like that. So follow us at All Source Gaming to stay up for that, and sourcegaming.info that's our website. If you want to follow me specifically, that's at Mr. Nintendo. And Del, where can people find you at?
You can find me for one on YouTube. I don't have an official channel URL yet, but if you search my name on YouTube, you'll find me. You can also find me on Twitter at Delzethin, same name as elsewhere. I'm also on Smashboards. I do a few things there. And I just want to briefly plug my main series lately. I've been doing a series called Challenger Approaching, where I talk about characters who could potentially get into future Smash titles. Lately, I've been focusing on characters who could get into the Smash 4.5 on the Switch, and then I go super into detail on how these characters could fight, what their moves could be like, their movesets, their playstyles, their appearance, animations, the whole 9 yards. I'm talking full character concepts and to truly paint a picture of what these characters could be like in Smash in a way that feels authentic to Smash 4 style and true to character.
Yeah.
We've done 7 so far, working on an 8th right now, and you can find all of those and future challengers at my YouTube channel.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to link the Decidueye one and the Lycanroc one in the description or as an annotation at the end of this video.
And I also have a Patreon now because I'm in kind of a rough situation and want to hopefully find a way to get out of it. And hopefully, if you end up enjoying my content, I'd really appreciate any help you can provide.
Alright, okay, and with that, guys, we hope you have a wonderful day and look out for the Nintendo Switch presentation that's going to be coming out this Thursday, Friday. So look forward to that, look forward to our coverage, and we'll see you then. Bye, guys.
Hope to see you again.